The state of Texas is doing whatever it takes to protect its borders from illegal migrants crossing into its state. So much so that the state of Texas decided to install this 1,000-foot long floating barrier to deter migrants from crossing the Rio Grande right into Texas. The only issue is Mexico wants to sue the United States over this barrier, the United States wants to sue Texas over this barrier, and many people are saying, well, this barrier is actually inhumane. But Texas is saying it's doing its job, stay out of our state. Now, real quick, what you need to understand is that where the floating barrier is placed is called Eagle Pass. And Eagle Pass gets tons and tons of illegal migrants trying to cross straight into Texas, like ankle-deep water just walking on through. So I want to give you context of how bad it's getting in that particular area of Texas and why Texas felt the need to place a floating barrier that's actually causing some issues.
There is an uptick in migrant crossings. Despite sweltering heat and barbed wire barricades, asylum seekers are not being deterred from entering border towns in Texas. This as state leaders are beefing up law enforcement to block illegal crossings.
So you heard the reporter, razor wire and the river itself, the Rio Grande, it's not stopping or deterring migrants from trying to come into the United States illegally. So Texas decided we have to beef up our security by placing this floating barrier to stop people from crossing the river.
We're getting our first look at the marine barrier going up along the river here in Eagle Pass. DPS tells us this stretch of buoys will go around 1,000 feet downriver. That's the equivalent of 3 football fields. And tonight, DPS is telling us this will help stop migrant crossings in this area, while some critics are calling them drowning devices.
Something else you should know about this barrier, the company who designed the floating buoy barrier, its actual design is to stop humans from crossing or trying to get through the barrier. The company also has particular designs for boats or ships, etc. But nonetheless, this barrier is particular for humans.
River in Eagle Pass. This group of Venezuelans just crossed into the U.S. and now must find the break in the man-made barrier to turn themselves over to Border Patrol custody. It's a sight all too common along the southwest border.
Some of the migrants that do come across, they see the wire, they're very determined to get across no matter what. And the reason behind it is because a lot of them have friends or family that have made it across. They know to go to a specific area and look for Border Patrol.
The razor wire, shipping containers, and more boots on the ground.
Now, the main reason why Mexico is annoyed at the United States, and I say United States because Texas falls under the United States, yet Texas did this with their own will, is that Mexico is saying that the buoys are breaking treaties signed by Mexico and the United States. One of them being the treaty to resolve pending boundary differences and maintain the Rio Grande and Colorado River as the international boundary. What Mexico is saying is that technically those buoys are floating into our area, so you're breaking a treaty here, Texas and United States. Another really big treaty that Mexico is saying that Texas, United States is breaking is that utilization of waters of the Colorado and Tijuana rivers and of the Rio Grande. Mexico is saying by you putting those buoys there, we are not able to utilize our side of the river because, again, the complaint is that, look, your buoys are crossing into our side of the river. Those are the legal complaints that Mexico is saying, like, hey, United States, you're breaking legal treaties here. Now, do not get this twisted with the humanitarian issues many people are saying about these buoys, because the other complaint is, well, these buoys have circle saws in the middle of them and they are way too dangerous. Check out this video. And again, the main purpose of these buoys is to deter people from floating or going across the river. That is what we heard from the previous video of the sheriff talking about, do not even cross this river. We have ports of entry. Nonetheless, again, I want to paint you the picture that on the other side of things, people are saying, well, this is inhumane. The only issue is, and I would almost agree with that, if these buoys were blending in with the water. These buoys are bright orange to indicate, do not come here. There are buoys here. They're not safe. Don't come here. Get away.
Congressman Joaquin Castro said that claim on his social media after inspecting some of them in person. Marine barrier system is a floating wall. It's about 3 football fields long. It's designed to prevent migrants from trying to swim across that border into the U.S. State says these barriers are not dangerous. Castro and other Democrats don't agree.
The state says that they're not a danger to anybody, but I want you to look right here at this chainsaw type device. They hit right in the middle of these buoys. It's incredibly dangerous, incredibly inhumane, and that's the reason that I've said that it's barbaric.
Okay, so as you saw, that political official says, well, these buoys are barbaric. The only issue is you could use that same standard for any sort of device that's used to deter people away. For example, this fence looks very barbaric. I mean, look at the way that the top of this fence, they twirled the spikes, and if I try to climb over it, even though I'm not supposed to be there, I might get caught up in it and I might get hurt. You see how you can turn anything barbaric? I mean, look at this microphone. The way that the stand has this clip over here, I can pinch my fingers in there, and it shouldn't be like that. It should be padded better. That's why I'm trying to paint this picture for you that you have a lot of humanitarian issues that people are saying, but then you have Texas that has a practical issue with, look, we have a ton of people who are crossing over into our border. What are we supposed to do? And look, Texas is being sued by the Department of Justice for the floating barrier.
Tonight, Texas Governor Greg Abbott not backing down after the Department of Justice threatened to sue over a 1,000-foot wall of buoys now dividing the Rio Grande between Mexico and Eagle Pass, Texas. The DOJ firing back against the buoys that Governor Abbott deployed earlier this month in a letter writing the state did not receive proper authorization for them, adding that the buoys violate federal law, raise humanitarian concerns, present serious risks to public safety and the environment.
So as you saw, the main complaint from the Department of Justice, or the DOJ, is that, look, Texas, you never waited or at least asked to put up this floating barrier, and now you're causing us all of these issues. But Texas is saying, guys, it's getting super critical out here. We need to do something to deter people away.
With no netting attached for now, officials say. The first 1,000-foot segment costing just under $1 million. Abbott firing back against the DOJ, writing, Texas has the sovereign authority to defend our border, vowing to continue using every strategy to deter smuggling and illegal crossings.
Now, I have to report on this. This is incredibly sad. There were bodies floating on the Rio Grande River that have washed up into the floating barrier. Now, I am not implying it is the fault of the floating barrier, but there is an investigation that is happening as to whether or not this floating barrier did cause drownings.
Developing now, the controversy surrounding the border buoys in the Rio Grande at Eagle Pass is heating up tonight. This after a body was found in those buoys yesterday. They've only been in place for a few weeks. The governor announced the floating barrier at a press conference in June, and installation started in July. Last week, the Justice Department filed a lawsuit against Texas and Governor Abbott, saying the buoys violate human rights and federal law. And on Thursday, a body was found stuck in the southern section of that barrier. The News 4 I-Team's Jordan Elder looked into what comes next for the deceased migrants and if this changes the governor's decision.
One of the big questions still surrounding this case is, did the migrant die before or after they got tangled in the barrier? Mexican officials are working to figure that out. We've received preliminary information that the person drowned underneath one of the international bridges in Eagle Pass.
Again, and I need to reiterate this because I think there's a lot of confusion when it comes to the floating barrier in Mexico. The main reason why Mexico is annoyed is because it's crossing into their territories, and Texas/the United States, they're technically breaking a treaty. But again, we keep seeing this humanitarian aspect connected to it, and it's confusing because nonetheless, how do you sue somebody or get mad at somebody for putting up a floating barrier that is bright orange and telling people to keep away? You're coming into our country. And again, I am just putting this out there to be fair on both sides. I would be a hypocrite to be like, everyone stay out, because my family, they are immigrants. My dad's from Romania, my mom's from Italy. I am a first-generation immigrant. So I understand this need and want to come to a better country for a better life. However, stay away from this floating buoy barrier.
They're seeing fewer drownings this year compared to last summer.
Well, because last year they were rushing big groups of 80, 100. The river, somebody know how to swim.
But when bodies are recovered on the U.S. side, which again was not the case with the body recovered yesterday, Schmerber says Operation Lone Star funds, aka your tax dollars, are used to transport and perform autopsies for the migrants. Governor Abbott says that he plans to take this floating barrier fight all the way to the Supreme Court.
Again, we don't have any proof that because of this barrier you had floating bodies on the Rio Grande. Nonetheless, I'm just trying to paint the picture again that there is a lot of controversy surrounding this floating buoy barrier. Okay, so when it comes to how effective this floating buoy barrier thing is, Texas is saying that it's working. It's keeping people away from that particular area of Eagle Pass. Nonetheless, though, it is not stopping migrants from still trying to come in via other means, but the point of this barrier was to stop this particular area that had an influx of many people just trying to cross the river. Nonetheless, I do think Texas will not get rid of it because it is effective, and they're just going to go all the way to court, as we saw in the report, to the Supreme Court. I am going to say this. I do think Texas is going to end up losing the case because Texas never asked for permission, and the federal government typically does override what the state does, and especially when it comes to the Lone Star mission, which is the military operation of the National Guard protecting the Texas border. It's going to get messy. It's going to get confusing. But nonetheless, even if Texas does get rid of this floating barrier, who's to say they're not just going to make even more barriers closer to their side of the border? Nonetheless, again, Texas is saying that it is effective. Mexico is saying that it violates sovereignty rights. You're crossing into our side of the waters. And there's also been other people who are trying to sue Texas, like a kayak company is suing Texas because they said that you ruined our entire company because now we can't even go through the Rio Grande River without having to try bypassing this floating wall. But to me, I'm like, why not just go the other way? Nonetheless, yeah, that's what's happening in Texas right now. It's a very complex and complicated situation. Leave your comments and opinions down below what you think of all of this. I personally think Texas does have the sovereign right to protect their borders, considering we're not talking like 10 people here, 10 people there who are trying to cross the river. We're talking thousands upon thousands upon thousands. Not all migrants are violent or bad. A lot of them are peaceful, but nonetheless, you have those ones and twos who are crossing in that are causing a lot of problems for Texas citizens. And I'm sure a lot of citizens who live on these Texas border regions are probably okay with all of this because they've been suffering from all of this for a long time. Farmlands being destroyed, and they just don't know who's crossing onto their properties. You know, they don't know who's friends or foe. Nonetheless, that's what's happening in Texas right now. Floating buoy barrier wall drama in Texas. It really is a war zone out there.